partisan, with the right saying it undermines the Russia investigation and the left calling it irrelevant.
That's it. That's all they've got.
What the memo makes clear: there was collusion after all, you bet. The collusion was between the Comey FBI, the Obama Justice Department, and the Hillary Clinton campaign.
After all that suspense and weeks of buildup worthy of an episode of The Apprentice, the reviews are in. And Congressman Nunes' memo was a dud.
It's an absolute disgrace. It is an embarrassment to the United States Congress. It is part of an effort to discredit the investigation of the President of the United States.
The highly classified FISA abuse memo has now been released, and it is absolutely shocking. It is stunning. Now, this now is the biggest abuse of power, corruption case in American history.
There are also questions about the ex-spy who wrote the so-called dossier and his leaks to journalists. Sean Spicer, the former White House spokesman, joins us on the battle over the FBI and his experience doing battle with the press. And there's all-out media warfare over the Mueller investigation, the role of Hope Hicks, the ouster of the FBI's number 2 man, Andrew McCabe, and the president supposedly demanding loyalty from him.
It's tough to imagine a previous president overruling an FBI director, especially about something like this, where the FBI director is saying this memo is full of falsehoods.
This guy, McCabe, needs to be taken out in cuffs. They should not be paid by the American people. He shouldn't be able to dictate when he's going to leave.
With the plot thickening and tensions rising, is the rhetoric getting too overheated on both sides? Mixed media reviews for the President's State of the Union, with some pundits dismissing the appeal for unity as just words. Are these verdicts as polarized as most of the coverage surrounding this president? Plus, the sudden focus on Melania and the marriage. Is the press going all-out tabloid? I'm Howard Kurtz, and this is Media Buzz. I was on the couch at Outnumbered on Friday when the Devin Nunes memo was released, and President Trump wasted no time in reacting.
I think it's terrible. You want to know the truth? A lot of people should be ashamed of themselves, and much worse than that.
But before we actually received the document on the set, Fox's Catherine Herridge was on the air with exclusive excerpts.
What we understand is that a senior law enforcement official testified during a closed, classified session to this House committee that without the dossier, this is the dossier that was funded by the DNC and Clinton campaign and compiled by Fusion GPS, the opposition research firm, they would not have been able to obtain at least one surveillance warrant for a member of the Trump campaign.
Joining us now to analyze the coverage, Rachel Bade, congressional reporter for Politico. Molly Hemingway, senior editor at The Federalist and a Fox News contributor, and Jessica Tarloff, senior editor at Bustle.com, also a Fox News contributor. As we deal with some technical difficulties here, the look is a little different. But Molly, Fox News, The Washington Examiner, and The Federalist, where you work, all got advance excerpts of a memo in the moments before it was released, a memo written by a Republican committee chairman, of course. And this fueled criticism that it was a partisan exercise. Fair?
Well, it's interesting that you say that, because the Federalist did not get an advance copy. One of our reporters was searching on House sites to see if he could get a copy as soon as it came out, and he found it through the old practice of reporting. And sometimes you can get things without them being leaked to you, which is something I wish more people in this town understood.
Well, thank you for clearing that up, Jessica. But there were some leaks, and if a Democratic committee chairman had written a memo and it appeared on MSNBC before everyone else had it, and the nation, you know, conservative pundits would cry foul.
Yeah, they absolutely would. So when the Democrat memo comes out, please don't leak it to anyone, because that makes my job a lot more difficult here if that's going to happen.
Rachel Bade, you were at the Republican retreat the other day at the Greenbrier. How much were the media focused on this about-to-be-released memo?
They were obsessed with it, to be honest. I mean, I was sitting in the gallery when Speaker Paul Ryan and Majority Leader Mitch McConnell came out for a press conference, and they were supposed to sort of be talking about tax reform and talking up the agenda in 2018. 7 out of 9 questions were about this memo, and it was sort of funny because one of those questions was, Speaker Paul Ryan, do you think Devin Nunes, who wrote the memo, should step aside for, you know, the way he handled this? And he said, no, But listen, tax cuts are working, and the transition was particularly hilarious.
Nice effort to stay on message. You know, the level of pregame hype here was certainly almost at Super Bowl levels. Molly, as I was reading the Devin Nunes memo, what jumped out at me was former British spy Christopher Steele, the author of the Russian dossier, it was said in the memo, lied to the FBI about his contacts with the media, and he was, quote, desperate that Donald Trump not get elected and passionate about him not being president. But it's not like the press had built up Steele as a man of great credibility. So how much did that tell us?
In fact, the press had built up Steele as a man of great credibility. They said the whole reason why the dossier was to be taken seriously or had been taken seriously within intelligence agencies and law enforcement was based on this man's credibility. And what we learned, like this memo was the first time that we'd gotten information that wasn't based on anonymous sources. We actually got some hard data with people putting their names behind it. For a year, we've been subjected to anonymous leaks and little snippets of information here and there. And here we learn that this guy was considered dishonest by the people who used his credibility to secure a wiretap, and that part of that dishonesty was related to how he had been talking to the media. Many of the stories that we got on the Russia narrative were in fact planted by the same people who were creating the Russia narrative and getting it into the FBI. This is a really interesting media story as well as an interesting legal and other story.
Right. Well, I've always referred to the dossier as unverified, as unsubstantiated. And remember, no news organization against BuzzFeed published it when it was being leaked or was circulating. But Jessica, New York Times headline today, one of many, Trump's unparalleled war on law enforcement. So the president going on Twitter claiming total vindication in light of the House GOP memo, which of course was released over the vociferous objections of the FBI director. But the press is framing this as President Trump versus DOJ and FBI.
Yeah, I think that's exactly what this is. It was very clear from the beginning that President Trump was dead set on making sure that he got in the way of the Mueller investigation no matter what. He doesn't want Rod Rosenstein doesn't want Rod Rosenstein there anymore. I don't think he's going to be able to do this on the backs of it, since there are many Republicans who are talking about this memo as, I hate using the term, but saying kind of nothing burger about it, even though I personally do think there's interesting information in there that we absolutely did need to see. First of all, that the Steele dossier was not the only thing that the FISA warrant was based upon. We know that there were 4 judges that approved this, Republican appointees at that, who would never have done this straight off of the Steele dossier. We know that the investigation began with George Papadopoulos in June 2016. That's before the Carter Page re-up of the warrant. And we also now know that Carter Page in 2013 said that he was an advisor to the Kremlin. Right. So I think that the FISA court had good reason to be looking at him whether he worked for Donald Trump or not.
Well, let me jump in and ask you a political media question, Rachel, which is the Democrats argue, and you see this in the media coverage, and especially on some liberal shows and liberal websites, that the memo itself is misleading and has important omissions, a couple of which Jessica just touched on about how much other evidence was presented to this special FISA National Security Court to obtain that surveillance warrant. Has all of this kind of muddied the waters for what the Republicans hope would be this bombshell revelation?
Absolutely. I think there was just as much coverage and sort of balking at the process by which House Republicans released this memo without having the Democratic rebuttal, without approval from the FBI beforehand, as there was about the actual content of the memo. It was interesting. I was watching it all play out, just came back from the West Virginia Republican retreat on Friday, and I was watching Chris Stewart, who is a Republican from Utah, who is on the House Intelligence Committee, voted to release this memo. He was on CNN, and he was talking about this. They were asking him mostly questions about why he didn't release the Democratic rebuttal. If you were so confident, they were saying you should have done that. They were saying, you know, you sort of you made this typically an oversight, bipartisan process, partisan, when you left the Democrats alone. And, you know, it was just interesting because we didn't hear a lot about the content of the memo for that couple hours. So, you know, he at one point was like, listen, why aren't we talking about what's actually in this memo, which is this oversight question about whether or not the FBI can go to the court and present this information without saying it was from a Democratic opponent of the president.
But there is reporting now that they actually did know that it was backed by a political entity. So that argument is flung out the window for Republicans.
Let me just jump in. Let me just jump in for it. Yes, that was reported that the FISA judges did know that, but not specifically that it was a Democratic National Committee or the Clinton campaign. Let me move back to the media. There's been an explosion of media reaction. Molly, I want to get you in on this. So after this memo comes out, Carl Bernstein on CNN says we haven't seen such dark days for American democracy since the days of Joe McCarthy. calling the president, that's the current president, demagogic authoritarian. And on MSNBC, Donnie Deutsch says, our democracy is under siege. People need to start taking to the streets. This is a dictator. What do you make of that kind of rhetoric?
Well, there was very extreme rhetoric about the idea that if you were transparent about the way that the Department of Justice and FBI secured a wiretap on someone, that you're threatening the republic. That is itself not healthy to have that attitude there. There have been so many false things said about the memo, and you see them repeated throughout the coverage. Even, these claims that the memo was somehow inaccurate. The FBI did review the memo and had the opportunity to say if anything was inaccurate. They absolutely did think that Carter Page's past should be in there, but they don't dispute the facts of the memo. So when certain people come out and say that facts are in dispute, I think reporters have an obligation to verify that before they just run with that claim. And in general, everyone should take a step back and think about what this memo says, that a Hillary Clinton-funded opposition document invented, through the Hillary Clinton campaign, made it to the highest levels of our government and was used to spy on a Trump campaign affiliate, even though it is still unverified and still just as unverified as it was when they took it to the court and claimed that it had corroborating evidence that it did not have.
Carter Page, of course, the Trump people used to say he was just a low-level volunteer, and it's interesting he's come back into the spotlight. Now, Jessica, one of the things that really struck me was a Yahoo story by reporter Michael Isikoff was actually cited in the memo as having been presented to the FISA court judges, and it was also revealed that Christopher Steele, who was sort of peddling this to news outlets, had met with Isikoff at Yahoo. And Isikoff was on CNN yesterday and said he was as surprised as anybody that he went out and confirmed the information that Steele gave him. And besides, says Isikoff, the FBI already knew what he was reporting. Your reaction to the use of the media, or attempted use of the media at that time?
Well, it's obviously concerning, and I thought that Catherine Herridge did a great job on Friday. I was sitting on that outnumbered couch with you, and explaining what circular reporting is and how dangerous that can be when everyone is just going around trying to find an outlet to confirm what it is that they've already said. But I thought that Michael Isikoff did a great job in explaining what actually happened there. And to the larger point about the Steele dossier and what happened then getting to the FISA court, this information was corroborated elsewhere. They didn't just show up and say, oh, this is good enough for me. They made sure that there were multiple sources. So this idea, which Republicans are basing all of this on, that only an unverified, salacious dossier was the backbone for a FISA warrant on a guy who's bragging about being a Kremlin advisor, by the way, is just unsubstantiated.
This is, again, something that the FBI doesn't dispute.
Hang on. Let me get to Rachel on this, because you have these other developments I just want to touch on. So Andrew McCabe forced out this week, #2 at the FBI, a bit of a report that the president had asked for his loyalty. You have the New York Times reporting that Hope Hicks, communications director, had said on a conference call with the president about that Donald Trump Jr. meeting with the Russians, that the emails with the president's son would never come out. Her lawyer flatly disputes that. Even if she did say it, doesn't mean that it's any kind of obstruction. So some journalists are saying, whatever the revelations about this FISA dispute and Carter Page, it doesn't really affect the current Mueller investigation. Is that a fair argument?
I think there are actually a lot of Republicans who are making the same argument, too. The interesting thing about the coverage this week on the memo is that there really are two extremes here. You have people on the far right saying, look at this memo, it totally undercuts the entire Russia investigation. Even the president has suggested this, that the whole investigation is a witch hunt, pointing to this memo. And then you have Democrats saying, oh, Republicans are just trying to undercut this investigation. They want it to go away. They're trying to protect the president. Maybe there's actually a middle ground here. Speaker Paul Ryan, Oversight Chairman Trey Gowdy, they've said this is an actual oversight question. What exactly do you have to present the FISA court in order to get a warrant? I mean, obviously, we don't know.
A lot more to say, but I've got to get a break here.
Sounds good.
Now, you may have seen me on Fox a few times this week talking about my new book, Media Madness, Donald Trump, the Press, and the War over the Truth. It's available now at Amazon and bookstores if you are so inclined. Ahead, Sean Spicer weighs in on the media storm about his former boss and the FBI. But when we come back, the State of the Union gets some grudging praise from many pundits, and then, boom, drops off the radar. The banner headline in the Washington Post first edition described President Trump's speech to Congress this way: a call for bipartisanship. But the partisan reaction from the left was so negative, the paper tweeted out its final edition headline, which offered a more neutral quote, a new American moment.
When the president's talking about unity and he's talking about record low unemployment across every demographic, how are you not applauding that?
And more than anything, it was a speech delivered almost from an alternate reality.
And then you have the liberal mainstream media. They are in full breakdown, freak-out mode over the president's successful State of the Union address. You can't make this up.
Rachel Babe, what's amazing to me about the media reviews of the State of the Union, positive or negative, after this huge buildup, is how quickly the whole thing vanished from the media radar. Your thoughts?
Yeah, I think by Wednesday at noon, I mean, the Republicans on the way to the retreat actually were in a train accident, so everything quickly changed to that. And then at the retreat, I also was expecting a lot more talk about the State of the Union. You know, were Republicans okay with the president laying out a path for 1.8 million undocumented immigrants to become American citizens? That's a big question facing the Republican Party right now. But again, that memo just sort of sucked everything up. The State of the Union, it feels like it was 2 weeks ago right now.
Yeah, but you know, even before the speech, MSNBC in the 8 p.m. hour leading up, when you usually talk about what the president's going to say and analyze it, much of it was about the Russia investigation. So Molly Hemingway, look, some pundits made critical comments, as we heard there. Others said, yeah, it was a nicely well-crafted speech with some nice Reagan-esque moments, heroes in the crowd, but he's not really bipartisan. He doesn't really govern that way. Your thoughts?
Well, you know, you mentioned the change in the Washington Post headline from their first edition to later editions. They originally had a call for bipartisanship, and then they changed it to a new American moment. I actually thought that, and a lot of conservatives were upset because they had seemingly changed that under pressure from liberal readers. But in fact, I think a call for bipartisanship is kind of what you get out of every State of the Union, whereas this was a dramatically different speech. It had big themes, big pictures. A new American moment, I think, captures that a little bit better, and that maybe some of the pushback they got was inappropriate. But it was obviously a hugely successful speech. 75% of the country thought it was a really good speech. When there's good coverage for Trump, I think you do see people eager to move on from that onto the ground that a lot of reporters are more comfortable on, which is just a lot of hostility to Trump.
Jessica Tarloff, it is true that the instant polls showed that the public by large majorities liked the speech, and it does strike me as an example of the press either grudgingly giving this president credit or not giving him the benefit of the doubt when he does have a good performance.
I think it's very difficult to grade Trump for people on both sides of the aisle here, especially for liberals who got caught up in many moments where, you know, people like Fareed Zakaria and Van Jones saying things like, today's the day he became the president, and then the next day he's tweeting something crazy, and he is absolutely not the guy you saw on stage reading from a teleprompter the night before. You could see this especially in Van Jones's commentary afterwards on CNN, where he, instead of saying, oh, he did a great job, you know, he read very well from the teleprompter, there were big themes, etc., said that he was delivering sweet-tasting candy with poison in the middle, and then talked about the vilification of immigrants in that speech, which I completely agreed with that point. But overall, I actually think that the coverage of the State of the Union was quite fair. I didn't see a lot of people saying he did a terrible job there, and I also did see a lot of people, and from my own side, criticizing Democrats for their sour reaction to everything, not even getting up and applauding when he walked into the chamber. Dana Milbank has a great piece about that.
Yeah, they look very sour. I know
well, there are plenty of conservatives have looked sour when they were with Obama. If you saw Paul Ryan's face.
Sweet and sour speech. Looks. Let me mention some numbers here. Trump got a very big audience, and 11.5 million of those people watched on Fox News, far more than any other network. NBC, CBS, 7 million. But then he said it was the largest State of the Union audience ever, Molly Hemingway, although Bush, Clinton, Obama at various times had more. Why make that claim when it's certain to be knocked down by the media fact-checkers?
You know, I remember when he tweeted that, I wanted to look into not just the TV or streaming viewership, but other ways of viewing it as well, and I didn't look into it. Donald Trump cares a lot about crowd size, as we have learned in this presidency, but it was a well-viewed speech, and the way to respond to that as media people is just to provide the facts, and not just the Nielsen ratings, but all the other ways that people might have viewed online or otherwise. It
is true there's a lot more ways to watch these events these days. Thanks for bearing with us under these circumstances. Wish you were here on the set with me. Rachel Babe, Molly Hemingway, Jessica Tarloff. Have a great Sunday.
Howie.
Head on Media Buzz, Sean Spicer on his rocky White House tenure and whether he made some mistakes. But up next, why President Trump is skipping the Super Bowl interview, and it involves the network carrying the big game. It's Super Bowl Sunday, which means the country is again divided between those who hate the Patriots and those who worship Tom Brady. But the big game between New England and Philadelphia won't include the traditional pregame presidential interview. President Trump is blowing it off. And the reason, in my view, is that NBC is carrying the game. Trump, who often points out that he made a bundle for the network with The Apprentice, just has a thing about NBC. It was an NBC story that once prompted him to say some networks should have their licenses pulled, though the FCC doesn't license national networks. The Super Bowl interview would have been done by Lester Holt, and the president is not happy with last year's interview with the NBC anchor when Trump acknowledged his firing of Jim Comey didn't depend on findings by the Justice Department.
Because in your letter you said I accepted their recommendation. Yeah, well, so you had already made the decision.
I was going to fire regardless of recommendation.
So there was
he made a recommendation.
In an off-the-record session with network anchors this week, Trump complained to Holt about the editing of that interview, saying his best comments were cut out. NBC says that portion of the interview wasn't touched at all. The president also took a more good-natured swipe at another NBC anchor, Chuck Todd, saying he was a nice guy in person, but on air he turns into a monster. By the way, I report in my book, Media Madness, that the two men have had off-the-record sessions at the White House that start with the president yelling at Chuck and the Meet the Press moderator yelling back, followed by a civil conversation. Sometimes the president just likes to work the refs. Now, speaking of refs and football metaphors, why would Trump give up the massive Super Bowl audience that prompted even Barack Obama to sit down with Bill O'Reilly? He may not want to be peppered with questions about Russia, but it's more than that. Donald Trump, especially with his Twitter megaphone, is a 24/7 newsmaking machine. More than any other modern president, he doesn't need the Super Bowl to get his message out. So Trump will be watching the game like the rest of us, except he'll be at Mar-a-Lago. Coming up, Sean Spicer on media resentment toward his former boss and whether he's got some scars from his tour of White House duty. And later, is it news or gossip when major news organizations focus on Melania Trump and her marriage? In the midst of a fierce media debate over the Russia investigation, the role of the FBI, the release of that hotly disputed Republican memo, and the State of the Union, I was in New York when I spoke with Sean Spicer, the former White House press secretary. Sean Spicer, welcome.
Thanks, Howie. Good morning.
Much of the media are painting a picture of a president leading an extraordinary attack on the FBI and the Justice Department for the sole purpose of undercutting the Mueller investigation. Why are they wrong?
Well, I think, look, the president has a right to make it clear what his position is on issues, and I think based on some of the things that have come out regarding text messages between top investigators at the FBI, there seems to be at least some degree of concern or merit to the president's concern. I think if you're going to be investigated, you have a right to make sure that people understand the full context of what's going on, and especially in light of those text messages, clearly there were people who had been very clear about their dislike of the president.
You know, will you concede there is some partisanship on both sides? If Barack Obama was under investigation and he was pushing for the release of classified information and opposed by leaders at the FBI and Justice, and you were at the RNC, you'd be going bonkers.
Sure, I'll give you that. But at the end of the day, and that's the job. I mean, the DNC folks, I don't know that they have the money to have staff these days, but if they did, I think that they should be going after. That's their job. You're the opposition party. I think that's what you do. The difference is that I think you have to, as a citizen. And as a journalist, to some degree, people have to be able to sit back and figure out, okay, you know, call balls and strikes. If you're a fan of a team, you know, when your pitcher's out there, every pitch looks like a strike to you, and that's why we have umpires.
Was it awkward for you as the White House spokesman when the president was very publicly, repeatedly criticizing his own Attorney General, Jeff Sessions, and you had to stand there and kind of navigate those difficult waters?
No, I mean, there was a lot of difficult things. That wasn't high on the list.
Okay. Now, the State of the Union got sort of mixed reviews from the media. Here's what the president had to say about it the other night.
Because even the haters back there gave us good reviews on that one. It's hard for them to do. They came up with fake polls. You know, they had fake polls, but the fake polls were even good.
Excuse me, haters, fake polls?
Well, look, I think the funny thing about this was, you know, you look at CNN did its own poll, and it was I think it was the 70% of independents thought it was a really good speech, and then they found ways to talk about how it wasn't a great speech. At some point, if you're going to do a poll and the people in the poll say that they are for or against something, you know, what's the point of doing it if everyone on air is going to talk about how that they throw out all that and start talking about how bad it was? I was actually surprised. I've seen dial test polls from CNN CBS, other outlets that said it was well received. And that's the bottom line. I think that it was amazing to me to watch so much of the hand-wringing from the mainstream media. He gave a really good speech.
Let's clear up something from my book, Media Madness, involving Jonathan Martin, the national political reporter of the New York Times. My count is now based on 4 first-hand sources, but Jonathan Martin is denying it. When you were at the RNC, he had a conversation with a staff member who worked for you. What were you told that Jonathan Martin said to your colleague?
The staffer related a story that in the midst of a discussion, they had been told by him that by being a spokesperson and supporting the president, the then candidate, and his policies, they were complicit in being a racist. And they were very concerned with that accusation.
Now, is this true? You then called an editor at the New York Times, and then you got a call from Jonathan Martin. What did he say to you, and what did you say to him?
I did. I did call the editor expressing concern that that's not, I didn't think, appropriate behavior by someone who's supposed to be, an unbiased reporter, and expressed my concern. And, a few minutes after that, I did get a call back from Jonathan saying that he didn't find it acceptable that I had gone to his editor to express my concerns.
And you said?
I said, I have every right. I think that this behavior and these accusations that you launched towards a staffer were highly inappropriate, uncalled for, and I have every right to call an editor to express my displeasure.
All right, let's take a broader look. So the president used the term haters in describing the media. I don't think he means everybody, every single journalist who covers him. I've been advancing the argument that some of the opposition, or certainly the overwhelmingly negative coverage of the president that you work for, is not just rooted in ideology. Some may privately oppose his policies, but there's something cultural about it, something about Donald Trump as a candidate and as president of the United States gets under their skin. What did you come away with after all those months doing combat in the White House?
Well, I think that's true, and the Pew poll, which I think is fairly well regarded, shows that the negative coverage of Trump is 3 times that of even anyone close, and that I think it was 5% of the coverage was positive, which is significantly less. And I've always been a believer that the press's job is to be tough, but it's also to be fair and to acknowledge. Getting back to my analogy from a moment ago, you call balls and strikes. I think when here's what the policy is, here's what the actions are. But I think that the media has always had a very big conservative bias. It's a fact. It's not disputable. But with this president,
conservatives, you mean?
Correct.
Yeah.
There's that. I mean, I think I know that they all whine and they moan, but all of the objective data backs that up. And it's not just what gets covered; it's what doesn't get covered that I've always been more intrigued by.
Does President Trump contribute to the hostile relations with his attacks on fake news and individual journalists?
I think so, but I also think he has a right to call out when a story is false or a narrative is misleading. I keep reading these stories, Howie, and that's the reason that I'm writing the book, The Briefing, that's out for pre-order now on Amazon. But part of the reason is because I think that when you get questions, look, let me give you an example. A reporter calls and goes, some people are saying that the president's actions are, it's like, okay, who? Most of the time, I don't think it's some people. I think it's the reporter that is their own source and saying, I, the reporter, don't like what I'm hearing, and so I'm going to couch it in some say or people are saying. It's not people. Who are those people? Say it. I've talked to 18 voters. Here they are. This is what they say. But reporters these days, I think, make up narratives that fit what they believe. And I think that's different. The problem is this, and to put a pin on it, what makes this difference is that while reporters have always had an anti-Republican, anti-conservative bias. What makes a difference is that there's always been this, regardless of party, this desire for Republicans and conservatives to kind of develop the relationship, recognizing, hey, I need you, so let's try to be friends, and reporters will tolerate Republicans and conservatives. The difference with Trump is that because of social media in particular, he doesn't need them like other politicians have needed the press in the past.
Interesting point. In a moment, Sean Spicer on whether he made mistakes as the president's spokesman. Later, some journalists caught up in an expose of who's buying fake Twitter followers. More now of my conversation with former Press Secretary Sean Spicer, but first, a quick look back.
I appreciate your agenda here, but the reality is, oh, no, hold on. No, at some point, report the facts. The facts are that every single person who has been briefed on this subject has come away with the same conclusion. Republican, Democrat, so I'm sorry that disgusts you. You're shaking your head.
When you were White House Press Secretary, did you at times get too personal in going after reporters and combating reporters? And did the president encourage you to take such an aggressive tone?
I would say there's definitely moments where I regret some of the interactions that I've had, and I, regardless of whether they were deserved or not. In other words, I'm not saying that it wasn't without merit sometimes that a reporter, I think, crossed the line or went too far, but I've often sort of said I should have been the better person in that moment. So absolutely, there's been times that I look back and say, you know what, two rights don't make a wrong. And I should have been the bigger person in that instance and not, you know, kind of lost my cool or my temper or what have you.
Were you under pressure from your boss to be as combative as you were?
No. There were times when he might have said, you know, we need to correct this or this is ridiculous. And then I think I took I took that as a let's go charge the hill. And sometimes it should have been more carrot than stick or something like that. But it wasn't it was never a direct order to go out and attack this guy or anything like that. I think sometimes I got into the moment because of what we would perceive as, or what was not just perceived, but what was false reporting or false narratives that were being created.
As you've been making the rounds, do you have a sense now that some of your skeptics in the media want to see contrition from you, want to see you say you were sorry, want to see you say, boy, I really screwed things up?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, there's this, it's interesting. I've never seen, and again, I think it's because it's Trump and because it's conservatives. Everybody who's ever had that podium has made mistakes. I probably made them on a little bigger stage than others in the past. And gotten a lot more attention for him. But it's amazing how many mistakes reporters make and don't ever correct them. I made mistakes, absolutely. But it's this, to your point, this sense that there has to be this, absolution that I need to go seek. I'm proud of the job that I did. I'm proud of the policies and agenda the president's continuing to pursue. Did I make mistakes? Absolutely. But we all make mistakes. And I think
we
this
all make mistakes, and I think we can agree on that. Let me close with this. Now that you're not working for the White House, you're writing this book, you're going on television, can you be an independent voice, and would that include occasionally criticizing the president if you think he did something wrong?
Well, sure. I mean, I've been out there, and I made a comment the other day, post State of the Union. I think the speech was really, really good. I think that them not entirely 100% focusing for those following days only and exclusively on the contents and policy of that speech is a mistake. I continue to be a big fan of the team that's there and the president and the first lady. But like anyone else, I think I can be helpful in suggesting how things could have or should have been done differently.
And now that you're no longer at the White House, you don't even need the tie. Sean Spicer,
that's right.
Thanks very much for joining us.
Have a great Sunday. Go Pats.
After the break, more on the House GOP memo. Plus, it started as sheer gossip until the New York Times started writing about whether Melania Trump is unhappy. Do we need to go there? It's a tabloid tale that somehow found its way into the New York Times under this headline: Melania Trump out of sight since report of husband's infidelity to attend State of the Union. And then in the hour before the State of the Union speech, there was chatter on CNN with this on-screen headline: First Lady traveled to Capitol separately from the president. Really? Joining us now to scrutinize the coverage, Gail Trotter, who writes for townhall.com and The Hill here in Washington. And in New York, Kathy Arub, publisher of Catalina Magazine and a former Washington Post magazine editor. Gail, should major news organizations be reporting Melania looks bad, Melania didn't go to Davos, and just sort of fanning rumors, sheer rumors about the marriage?
No, this is an area, though, where the media seem like they can't help themselves from covering it, and right, wrong, or indifferent, they're going to probably keep doing it, and that's just the way it is. Breitbart's coverage of her outfit when she went to Florida was much more relevant when we think of first ladies like Jackie Kennedy. That's what the American people want to see about someone who's 100% apolitical.
More coverage of the outfits. That's your position. Kathy, perhaps we can agree after the endless media chatter over the years about Hillary Clinton's marriage that the press doesn't need to go there.
The press does need to go there because these women are part of history, and Melania is part of U.S. history. And if she breaks in tradition and not going to the State of the Union address with her husband, as previous former ladies have done, first ladies have done, then, yeah, this is history. So they should be talking about it. And the New York Times has every reason to report on history. It's the American thing to do, right?
We'll agree to disagree on that because I want to move on to the House GOP memo from the Intel Committee. New York Times reporting, Gail, that it fell well short of making the case promised by some Republicans, that it would have evidence that would cast doubt on the origins of the Russia investigation and possibly undermine the inquiry. That seems to be the media's takeaway. What are your thoughts on the coverage?
Right. Well, the surprising thing about the media coverage this week is that they didn't cover the explosive facts that this memo revealed, and instead they dwelled on procedural issues to the exclusion of the information that the memo came out. Everyone
hold on,
should
hold
be
on.
very
You say they didn't cover it. I mean, it was covered in every news organization. You might say the emphasis was wrong, but it was certainly reported.
They covered the procedural objections of the Democrats. They did not have headlines on every website and on every newspaper that said the FBI used a document commissioned by one presidential campaign to spy on another presidential campaign. That should have been the coverage.
Kathy, Washington Post, just to give another example, Christopher Steele, the ex-spy who wrote the dossier, it's an open question whether Steele's bias matters. He obviously hates Trump. If the information he provided was sound. In other words, the argument there is that the Nunes memo doesn't discredit Steele or the investigation itself.
Right, but we're seeing a discrediting, we're seeing a breakdown in all institutions. We're seeing a breakdown in the media, we're seeing a breakdown in people's trust of the media, people's trust of the GOP, people's trust of the Democrats, people's trust of the FBI, and people's trust of the president with this memo. People are confused, they don't quite understand, and it's the media's job to dissect it and explain it. And at the moment, no one's quite understanding what's going on with this memo. So I think all institutions right now are having a problem with a trust issue with the American people. And how the media is going to handle this in the future is going to determine how people are going to feel about it. And we're seeing very left and very right.
Let me jump in. The memo has certainly gotten caught in the media partisan crossfire.
Exactly.
And Gail, you know, on MSNBC, anchor Chris Hayes regularly uses the logo, the plot to stop Mueller. Now, obviously, the Republicans and some conservative media folks are trying to undermine the special counsel's investigation, but it doesn't mean that their information isn't accurate or relevant.
No, that's right. And the former director of the FBI, James Comey, said that the dossier was salacious and unverified. I disagree with you. I think that this is very clear. It's not confusing. The FBI used a document that was commissioned by one presidential campaign to spy on another presidential campaign. This is not Watergate. This is OceanGate.
Just 20 seconds, Kathy. Has the memo lived up to the media hype, released the memo, hashtag and all that?
Right. I mean, we don't know, but we do know that the president has used the memo to try to discredit the FBI. So that's what he's using it for. So this memo is going to hurt the FBI. It's going to hurt a lot of people. We don't know what is going to come out of it. So, yeah, it's living up to its reputation at the moment, and it's definitely showing the sides. It's showing two sides right now.
Right, but the press clearly focusing on the battle between the president, FBI, and Justice Department, which is rather unusual, even by Washington standards. Gail Trotter, Kathy Arou, thanks very much. Still to come,
be with you.
Some praise for the reporters who exposed the horrible wrongdoing of Olympic doctor Larry Nassar and how some media people are shelling out